Hello and welcome to the next episode of our Strasz Assessment Systems podcast, Beyond the Test Strasz Talks. I'm Rory McCorkle, I'm your host, and I'm excited for our dive today in our podcast into all things exam security. I'm going to be joined today by Ben Hunter from Caveon. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Rory. Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Ben, could you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Caveon Test Security, at least as far as I know as of today.
We'll check in later and make sure that's still the case. Well, Ben, we were reminiscing actually right before this started because we first worked together when I was the chair and co-chair of the security committee for ATP. And I think we're clocking in at a good 12 years of having known each other. So little frightening to think about. But that said, tell me about your background and what brought you into the wild world of assessments.
Sure. Well, I think like many of us that don't have as many titles after our name, like yourself, we trip and fall into it. I'm no different. I graduated college with a marketing degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car for a couple of years, and happened to be friends with somebody that did get one of those degrees. Good friend from college. Graduated with a degree in IO psychology. Had an open role at the Pharmacy Technician Certification Board, and I think my memory of it is they hired me and I kind of showed up at work on the first day and said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said, "We want you to go to this conference in like 2 weeks," which was ATP. And we kind of want you to build out what your job's going to be and figure out what test security is going to look like here. I think there was more structure around it than that. But my memory is that I kind of had this beautiful blank canvas to build a role for myself, and really it really was a cool opportunity that just like many of us, we kind of trip and fall into it. So I ended up here by accident. Liked it enough that I haven't left.
Well, I was going to say maybe accidental at the beginning, but purposeful on the ongoing, right?
Yes. And it's funny because you derive meaning from your work, and that's really for me, that has really kind of come full circle with, the way that my life has gone, and, with my children and some of the things that, we've gone through. It's just been wonderful. I don't know that I'm ever going to leave.
Well, naturally, as you know, I feel the same way. So it's good to have and continue to have you here. Ben, let's go to, I know Caveon's favorite subject, which is exam security. So would love to get your perspective, just, outright on how the landscape for exam security has evolved in the last few years. We've obviously seen just a few changes with the advent of widespread AI and the impact of COVID. We could go on, but I'll let you do that.
Yeah. Well, I think, we talk about the landscape and threats. I always come back to Moore's law and technology and the speed of technology improvement and the size that technology takes up. I believe, and Rory, check me on this, but it's something like what processing speed doubles and size of chips have every 18 months, give or take. And that's happening on an ongoing basis. And when I think about it like that, the speed and the velocity of threats are increasing as the cost to implement them go down. It's what we've seen, starting back in like 2006, when we came to computers and computer-based testing kind of in a widespread sort of way, and the technology that has kind of driven us, from that to remote proctoring to now AI coming on board. We've seen a lot in the last 25 years, and the cost continues to go down. It makes it more accessible for people that want to willingly cheat or cheat in an organized fashion. It makes it more accessible. We've seen those threats, they evolve, but the basic threats that we deal with are still the same. The cheating and the theft threats fundamentally don't change, but the ways that they're enacted have changed, and those continue to change, and they will continue to change.
Ben, I know a lot has been made about the, just to pull off your themes there, the increase in accessibility as well as some of the increase in just the widespread nature of proxy test taking, and that being, one of those emerging threats that we've seen come front and center. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that we could attribute that to, but would love to get your perspective on just both that increase as well as what you're seeing in terms of tools to combat that. Because it does seem at times that we're fighting a losing battle.
Well, I think we're talking specifically about remote proxies. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we as programs, or not we as programs, but test programs, when we're looking at threats, we're typically looking at it at an individual level. And what we're seeing now, especially in the the remote space with remote access proxies, is more than that. I think it's more than just a couple friends getting together. Like what we're and I don't want to be an alarmist, but effectively what we're looking at is organized crime, and that sounds big and scary, and it is big and scary, but I think the reality is that what we're dealing with today is a threat that is bigger than the individual cheating or cohort cheating, somebody's professor trying to get their school a better grade. It's a systemic, ongoing, intentional issue that has infrastructure behind it, and I think we need to change the way that we think about that and the way that we look at it.
I completely agree with you, Ben, and we've certainly seen that play out. I mean, there's some notable case studies. I think about the university professor in Florida who used some proxy test taking services as a way to kind of assess their capabilities within a university, and when they didn't get paid, they came after her on social media, threatened to out her, and I mean every marker of a kind of mafioso mentality. I mean, at the same time, how are you at Caveon, and how are you seeing or organizations, work to try to combat this? Because certainly we've had evolution in how we can address those threats.
Sure. And I think for us, the big challenge has always been, how do you address this particular threat without having physical access to the infrastructure? And to take that a step further, we're working to address it without needing access to the candidate's infrastructure, their physical device, at a system level. There are a lot of things that you can do when you have root level domain access, right? But there are the reality is that unless it is a company owned computer, you're not likely to get that, as an outside or external party. So really what we have been focusing on, and I actually hadn't had the opportunity to share this with you previously, but just got some numbers on some of the beta tests of our proxy detection platform and system algorithm that we have, that we're working on our side, that measures inputs. So it compares things like keyboard and mouse movements that are visible and apparent on screen. When you combine that with a second camera, to what the candidate is actually doing. And you can practice that a lot. I think you could probably practice it and be a proficient expert in mirroring somebody's behaviors on a screen, like, sitting at your computer. And I still don't think you can match it perfectly enough to have that not be detected. So for us, the way that we're looking to tackle it is actually through visual monitoring of the candidate hands, keyboard, and mouse, and comparing that with the actions that are occurring on the screen. Because anybody that's been around a testing program for long enough has seen the video of the candidate sitting there with their hands flat on their desk while their exam is moving through, right? And we need to do something a little bit different, because just knowing that there's something plugged into the computer because we have system level access isn't giving us that, that ability. It's not catching the screen splitters afterwards. It's not catching the Bluetooth screen mirroring, things like that. So we need to look at it a little bit differently. And in our first runs of that, my understanding is that we were catching about 85% of those activities when we ran through our first beta of that.
So Ben, it's been interesting. Recently Tim Burnett held a great session on the use of AI to create cheating tools, and of course just held that for test publishers. Certainly didn't want that more widespread, but really did a great job of showing how easy it is to leverage that technology to use cheating tools, or to create cheating tools, excuse me. At the same time, we all know that AI has been really helpful to enhancing some of our security practices. So just curious as how have you and Caveon seen AI both create additional risk vectors as well as improved our ability to secure exams?
Sure. I think one of the things that we saw coming out, post-COVID, in the what we'll call is the Chat GPT era, is the advent of the homework helper plugin. I think I can see a lot of utility for that as a student, but as somebody that works with tests, I see the threat, in a really, really, really big way. Going back to the sort of evolution in the landscape, that you were talking about earlier on in the call, the thing that really sticks out to me is that when you look at the kind of evolution of the industry, it's evolution along the same line. We went from in-person testing to test centers. We took the lessons learned and the rules and best practices that worked in the test center or in the in-person classroom experience or administration event experience. We put those into the test center. And then we go online and we try to recreate the test center environment in an online fashion, but with different hardware, different capabilities, and different levels of control. And when I look at that line, I see iterations and evolutions of the same concept without stopping to kind of think, is there a better way to approach this? And I think that leaves us on our kind of back foot when it comes to security and the threats that AI can bring, because AI is not bringing those same biases. We talk a lot about bias in testing, and I think there's a little bit of bias that we're dealing with in just kind of getting out of that rut of how we've always done business, that I think AI is getting a step ahead of us, and I think we really need to catch up.
No, completely agree, and I think it is challenging, to your point, some of those assumptions, and we have seen interesting developments in the profession wherein there are groups that have just accepted, particularly for some non-high stakes exams. When I think about things like some of the maintenance of competency models and some of those other types of assessments that we put out, they've accepted security risks and they realize that they're going to have to take a content approach to combat that. Are there other ways in which that you've seen organizations kind of thinking outside the box and challenging that typical narrative as they work to battle those exam security threats?
Well, I think your mention of the MOC exams in particular is interesting, because I think it begs the question, how do we define security? or what are we defining as security? Because in that Fort Knox model of security, I would argue that yes, having content out there unproctored is a security risk. But when you take a step back and you look at all of the things that go into what does security actually mean? What's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is validity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're taking active steps, like you mentioned in that content model, to continually refresh your content, to continually, work to make sure that you are monitoring the stuff that's out there, like that's all security, even if it looks a little bit different. So, I think I always start kind of any discussion around that, like how are we defining security? And I think that's an important, kind of footnote for this whole, discussion. In terms of what other organizations are doing, we've been working with a couple IT companies since 2016 on different item types. We have some content protective item types like the discrete option multiple choice. And this is not a psychometric discussion, so we don't need to get into the nitty gritty details of all of that. But, at the end of the day, there are ways that you can protect your content. And if you're measuring accurately and you're measuring according to the standards and all of the good stuff that goes into making an exam, I think there are tools in our toolbox that we're not using kind of across the board. One of the big research areas that we have been working on at Caveon is into randomly parallel tests and using AI to generate massive pools of content, and looking at the measurement of the measurement equivalence of random pools pulled from theoretically unlimited bank of questions. So again, there's lots of discussion to go around there, but yeah, there are ways that programs are tackling this challenge. It's not all get a bigger hammer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Punish. It's not all punitive and candidate focused. And I think we're going to continue to see the evolution of security through design grow. And I'm really excited to see where that goes.
No, completely agree. Well, you bring up a good point, though, and that is, obviously, IT certification groups is a great example. These large certification programs often have that ability to use that wide array of security tools, partner with vendors like us to, prevent and address security risks, what have you. Knowing that you've also worked at some organizations that are a little bit more bite-sized in terms of their delivery volumes, how should smaller credentialing bodies, really look to create a security plan, prevent security risks, absent just our delivery vendor takes care of that for us.
I think the reality is a lot of programs have more on the books that's ready, that just needs to be organized than they think. Every program has an appeals process, right? What do you do if a score gets canceled? What rights does the candidate have? And I think when you look at security sort of from that lens, it's the classic, like, you need to say what you're going to do, and then you need to do that. And I think for a lot of programs, it's as simple as that. Just starting somewhere, saying, this is what we're going to do for security. This is how we're going to handle it. And this is what those impacts are going to be. The reality is, you can still have important security processes, even if your organization is never going to cancel a score, or is never going to go after somebody for an infringement violation, because there's there are all sorts of business and political concerns that go into that. But to say we're never going to run into that situation, so we're just going to ignore it, I think is like woefully misguided at best. I think there's a lot that we can do on the practitioner level to organize and bolster security, at the ground level, and then move that up the chain.
Well, and to that point, Ben, I mean, I remember in one of your prior roles, one of the parts that you spent quite a bit of time on was just even mapping process. Yeah. And going through that process to demonstrate, where potential vulnerabilities were, and where even just basic process improvement or process reworking could really enhance the value of the program. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a really great approach, because it's something that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, and you got to start somewhere, and that's that's where it comes in. Like, I think people don't realize, and I guess it's easier for me to say that because I've been there and I've done it. But I was shocked to see how much we had. It just wasn't organized in a way that was conducive for me at the practitioner level to do anything with it. And just taking that time to consolidate everything, to build a security plan, to say, these are our organization's policies, these are the ways that we are going to deal with those issues. That can have candidate actions, that can have program actions, that can have rules changes, that can be tied to item writing, it can be tied to all sorts of stuff. Do you have all your NDAs in place? Like, it's pretty base level stuff that I think we just really need to work together and consolidate, because at the end of the day, you can't do anything. You can't manage what you don't measure. And if you don't have any sort of plan around it, you've got to start somewhere. And I think that's a great place to start.
Well, just as we begin to close here, Ben, would love for you to share, and I know you've mentioned a couple things in this area, but what innovations that you've seen recently, or are upcoming, based upon some of the things we saw at ATP this spring and ICE last fall, in the area of exam security that you're most excited about?
Well, I think the thing that I'm personally most excited about is, the platform that Caveon is rolling out. It's called Observer, and it's really the kind of melding of 20 years of Caveon's experience, adding AI, adding data streams and different inputs that we get, and we can synthesize all of that together now thanks to AI. But the thing that's most exciting, for me, is that it's enabled us to bring real-time data forensics to the market. And from an observation standpoint and a session administration standpoint, that allows us to really take a data-based approach to who needs monitoring, who needs to have those eyes on them. And it helps us to create a friendlier experience for the candidate, because we now know, based on that data, that somebody going through the exam now needs eyes on them. There's a lot, I think there's a lot that's really exciting. I also think there's a lot that, we want to see some more data on, see some more research on. And, for us, it was kind of that first step of, how do we take a step away from that sort of straight line of innovation and improving on the last model, and try to step sideways a little bit, take a look at a different way, and see if there's a friendlier, more candidate friendly, more fair way to administer exams.
Well, and I am certainly excited about the possibilities of real-time data forensics. I actually had to go back and look it up, Ben, but I think the first time I mentioned that in a conference presentation was in 2017. So you fulfilled an 8-year dream of mine. So there you go.
Well, you're welcome. And this is a little known fact. We actually did it for you.
Well, now I know. With that in mind, Ben, thanks for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it, and for giving your insight on the ever evolving space of exam security. So thank you very much. And for our listeners, thank you for your time and taking the time to spend with us on the podcast. Please look for our next episode in just about 2 weeks. In the meantime, take care and have a wonderful week.